Today we have the last 3 pieces of advice for men. This will complete our total of 13 pieces of advice for men, young and old. So let's get to it. Hello, and welcome to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours, a place to discuss stories the mainstream media ignores that can actually impact our Christian walk and our spiritual journey. Chaplain Warren and Chaplain Nan are your hosts, and we're glad to have you with us. Hello, and welcome back to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours. This is our third and last episode talking about pieces of advice for men, young and old. In episode 32, we covered the first 5 pieces of advice. In episode 34, we covered the second 5 pieces of advice. And in this episode, we'll finish up with the final 3 pieces. In the show notes, we will put links to the 2 previous episodes in case you missed those or want to go back and review. Now, before we get into the last 3 pieces, I'll just briefly review how we really started this. So over the last, few months now, we've seen several articles and YouTube videos offering various kinds of advice to men. Not the fringe kind of stuff that suggests that you run off into the wilderness and live among the wolves and such, which Andrew Tate and others like him put out, but really more practical advice for living a good life in the world that surrounds us, and as the world is, not as we wish it would be, but as it is. And so I originally picked out 2 articles in particular to use as templates to create a list of our own. And we'll give links to those original articles in our show notes because they're actually quite good. Now, one question we discussed early on is, why are we getting all of this advice all of a sudden? Well, I call it the Trump effect. And what I mean by that is it's about being unapologetically masculine, properly assertive, and in most cases being correct. Something that, very interestingly, is becoming cool again. And so, without further delay, let's get into the final 3 pieces of advice. But before I start, let me ask Chaplain Nan, do you have any comments to make before we dive in?
Just that President Trump he said this when he first started in 2016 during one of his campaigns, and I always remember it, during one of his rallies. He said, I'm going to teach you all how to fight and how to win. And I believe over the decades of him watching what was happening to the country, he determined that in particular males, and I think in particular young males, had lost that sense of, as you said, their masculinity, but to fight back, not to be a jerk, but to fight back, to defend yourself, and to actually be victorious in that endeavor. And all these decades later, with his wisdom of his age, he knows just how to do such a thing and how to, lose some, but how to win some. And we're kind of like living in that, which a lot of people don't like. Which is why I do believe, if you pay attention, though we grew, for our generation, the song that he plays all the time, that he dances to, is the YMCA song, which we understood it to be of a different topic, which I won't get into right now. But I think he chose that song because the first line says young men.
Yeah.
Young men. And it goes on about, it's a different kind of topic, but his whole thing is he's really addressing how to get back young men. Anyhow, so just a little caveat in case people didn't know that.
Well, no, that's a really good point. And as I've said, golly, dozens upon dozens of times, when people just are at their wits' end about him, and the fact that he keeps winning and all of that kind of stuff, and he rises up when common wisdom would teach you that he should be totally vanquished. I say you need to read the book, The Art of the Deal, because he is the master of it. And like the deals he does, or don't like those deals, you have to admit that he's very good at what he does. Mm-hmm. So anyway, thanks a lot. That was a good add to what we started off with. So let me jump into piece of advice number 11. And this is one that I think is critically important, particularly as our world just continues to change at an accelerating rate. And that is, certainly everyone does, but especially men need to be adaptable. Because we don't know what the world is going to look like 20 years from now. I might want to change that and maybe say 2 years from now, let alone 30, 40, or 50 years. And so, you may take off on a particular path of education. You may go to trade school to learn a trade, which is a great thing now. But 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you've got to be adaptable, because we don't know what world-changing technologies and major shifts in the global economy and demographics and culture are coming down the line. There's just no way to predict that with any certainty. And anybody that tells you they can steer a wide course around them. And so part of being adaptable is to be a constant learner, always improving yourself and thinking about that side hustle or side job or a side gig that you need to have in order to stay relevant in the world and to stay marketable. In fact, I was just watching a YouTube video earlier today during lunch, and it's a YouTube from a car repair company in Georgia. I just started following their videos a few years ago because although some of it, or a lot of it's about car repair, the guy who runs the place is really an astute business person. And so I enjoy some of the commentary he makes. Anyway, he was talking about his service technicians and how the world today is so extraordinarily different than when he was coming up through the ranks back in the early 80s. And, he was a high school graduate. He had learned auto repair, I don't know, with his father, grandfather, what I can't remember. But anyway, he bounced around from shop to shop and got lots of skills. And then eventually he opened his own shop. He said, nowadays, the skill level needed by service technicians is not the grease monkey type of image that we have or used to have of service technicians. They need to be very skilled in electronics, in electrical work, and absolutely able to use computers and sophisticated diagnostic tools to solve very complex, systematic jobs. Because as one of the service techs was talking about, he said, this car I'm working on here, he said it has 30 different separate computer systems in it. Back when, I can't remember the owner's name, but he said when you were coming up, you might work on cars that had 1 or 2 computers in them. And he said, but this car has at least 30 and maybe more. And if one of them goes down, it can bring the whole car to a complete stop. So So he's talking about he's constantly taking training courses, which the owner supports, so that he can keep his skills fresh and keep growing in his skills, so that he continues to be an integral part of this repair business. And so I thought, wow, what a great testimony. And the other thing that this technician didn't talk about, but you could obviously tell that he had a great work ethic. He took pride in his work. He talked about how solving problems was really motivating for him and all that. And that's, the part of the job that he really enjoyed. So we want to make, in addition to being whatever training we have, work ethic is very, very important, because nowadays and in the future, people who can do a job, that is, people who have technicals, the proper skills, whatever those are, and people who will do a job, that means show up, give your best, give more than your best, go out of your way to help people, and people who will fit in with the culture of the job. Those are the kinds of people who will always be in demand. I guarantee you, I see it all the time. Piece of advice number 12. Be a gentleman to women, children, and the infirm. Men are created and called to be gentlemen around women. That's part of what being a man is about. That's part of what being a leader, particularly a spiritual leader, is about. And this ingrained ability and calling to be a gentleman, this is a total rejection of feminism, as it should be. A gentleman treats all women with respect at all times, no matter what they're getting back in return. To be a true gentleman, you act like the gentleman at all times. Even women who reject your charity, like opening a door or something like that, be the gentleman. Take the high road. Down here in the South, the deep South, we say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, all the time. And we also say yes, sir, and no, sir, because it's a form of respect that we pay to those that we're speaking with or that we're conversing with. It just comes natural, and it elicits typically a nice return from the person that you're talking to. And I would advise looking up Romans chapter 12, verse 20, which says, "If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head." So that's talking about taking the high road, and not just for the sake of taking the high road, but showing your enemy what a true gentleman looks like, a true leader, not a vicious leader, not an evil leader or anything like that, but what a true gentleman and leader looks like. Also, along this line, children learn positive things by receiving respect from you and by watching you give respect to others. Children learn by observing and by doing, and what they observe you doing will go a long way towards determining the way they're going to turn out. And always, Christian charity demands you be the person of Christ to the infirm of any age or any condition. And finally, piece of advice number 13, our last one, help the poor. Another verse from Scripture to memorize might be Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. "And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.'" And what this means is that when we go out of our way to help someone, we are showing the mercy of Christ. And in James chapter 2, verse 13, the scripture says, "For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy." Mercy triumphs over judgment. And so if we really want to be a man of leadership, a man of good leadership, a man of good example, a man of good morals, then certainly helping the poor, the infirm, the weak is one of those things that ought to be a part of our toolkit. And I guess maybe one final reason to help the poor is that you'll be a better person for being kind to those who need kindness. You'll be showing the world the image of Jesus that lives in you. And my brothers, in our seriously fallen world, people need to encounter Christ wherever they can. Okay, so Chaplain Nan, do you have any comments or questions about those or anything else we've brought up in this episode?
Well, I just have a couple of comments. The points you made were most excellent coming from the female perspective regarding my wish for and prayer for men, in particular young men. When you talked on this section, you went into great depth about the adaptable and about their employment situation. About being a gentleman, it's especially terrible in Europe right now, is the whole notion of, and we see it in the big cities, there's a lot of TikToks that sometimes I think they're fake, because I was like, somebody's filming this terrible situation. So I think they're setups, but nevertheless, just unconscionable, what we used to call rude or thoughtless behavior from everybody, male and female. But a small one is like on the subways or on a train or on a bus or on public service place. It's very discouraging to see young, strapping, strong men sitting down, looking at their phones or having their headsets on or whatever you want, totally ignoring some poor elderly person trying to get up, trying to make their way, say on the bus or on the subway, and they have say a little cart, or they're carrying groceries or something, and there's no place to sit and they have to stand up. Same thing way back in the day. If there was a pregnant woman, everybody stood up. Everybody, male and female, they would stand up. Everybody would just get up and she would have her choice of seat. Now today, it's almost like a cold heartlessness that, when I see people like that, when I see people do that, I have to think, well, your parents or your mother or your father taught you what you're doing, because I think basically we're good. I don't think basically we're thoughtless and rude. I think, sometimes we are, but I think basically see somebody in need. I think our natural instinct is to assist another person who might need help. And it seems like it's a coldness that's come over people that's even more intensified to become almost cruel and just, I don't know how to explain it, but the whole men stand up, if an older person, or like you said, an infirm person, or say a woman who's got 2 babies in her arm, or she's trying to carry the stroller, and they just walk right past her, or they don't get up and she has to stand up and try and balance herself while the buses or the whatever she's on is moving around. And just that thoughtlessness, I don't know it's like what happened, not to the generation that's doing it, but what hurts my heart is, who are the people who raised you? Because that's where that thoughtless heartlessness comes from. I mean, some people are raised beautifully and they still turn out to be jerks, but for the most part, it seems to be the generation before the generations we're looking at. I'm like, who are you? What happened to you? Because the generation before that who raised you probably tried really hard to church you, to teach you manners, and you just went about your business scrambling and totally left behind your children who are now adults, who are these thoughtless, almost cruel people. Not everybody, and I don't want to put everybody in a peg, but I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. If you walk in somewhere, you'll see a big guy just push past little women or elderly people, and just like in a store. Am I making sense?
Oh, yeah. And, I would add to that in terms of who trained you to do that, it may be that your parents were missing in action or just missing, period. And you learned all those manners from your not so great friends. And, in one of our previous episodes, we talked about one of the pieces of advice was be discerning about who you choose for your friends, because bad friends can corrupt good morals. And I think what you're talking about is a perfect example of that. If someone is just run with the bad part of the crowd, they're going to pick up the bad habits of the bad part of the crowd, and being self-centered and selfish like that would definitely be one of the habits I think they might pick up.
Oh, while you were talking, it brought to mind, I saw a little clip, and I believe the United States of America prides itself on being the most generous country out there in terms of taking care of others and having a good sort of good neighbor sort of attitude, and we're very, very forgiving. So we have all these qualities that we wish to pass on to others, which seem to not be being passed on. But I saw a little clip about, and I don't know how true or not true it is, but that in the country of Japan, kindergartners, when children, I think it's kindergarten through first or second grade, they do not learn subjects. They learn manners and behavior. And that's all they do. So that, and I really chewed on that. I thought, wow, that might make it actually interesting, another segment maybe, to talk about how at the youngest age they're formed into their shape, their behavior is shaped and formed and instructed so that they have plenty of muscle memory on how to comport themselves naturally without the pressure of trying to learn a subject. And that one learn like what you would call gentlemanly or appropriate behaviors, polite behavior. Then as they get into the next grades, then they start adding the subjects. I found that so interesting. So anyhow, just, if you look at how people comport themselves in other places, some places are horrible and some places are quite astonishingly, for young people, you didn't ever see that here. For older people, that's how it used to be. But maybe we sounded like two crotchety old people talking about the good old days, and maybe they weren't so good. But anyhow, the other comment I wanted to make was in the other portion when you're talking about helping the poor, I thought that was really spot on. And it's a really good point, to be kind to others and to show Christ to others. It made me remember that there's a challenge, and it's not really something where you can display it to to other people. You're not displaying it to other people, but it really shapes, informs in your internal character about doing for others. And that's the challenge, is to do every day. It's really hard to do. It's a good Lenten practice. Every day, do something good for someone else without anybody knowing it was you. It's a real challenge, because once you get going with it, you do these really great things, and it's so hard because you're itching for somebody to know it was you. It's a real challenge about helping others anonymously. Anyhow.
So it's hard to do that every day?
It's really hard to, if you take the challenge on, it's hard to do just once. But if you take the challenge on to try and do it every day, it's really, it becomes quite a discipline in itself. Anyhow, my little note about it was that Jesus says that the Father knows what you do. And there's many gospel passages about don't be seen, right? Don't be seen praying. Right. If you give privately. You don't have, because your reward is being, that's so true. Your reward is once the accolade, you did this and people know you're this great person who did something good, so that only you and God know that you did such a thing. And the other one also is to do something without do something for somebody cannot repay you. That is another good one. Anyhow, which is really helping the poor because they can't repay you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I appreciate that. And, as we said in previous episodes, as we go through all these pieces of advice, I don't expect, or we don't expect, that every piece of advice that we've talked about will have the same impact on all men. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you are a naturally adventurous person, well, you already have point number 4 covered, which was a point we covered in episode 32 about being an adventurous person. Okay, you've already got that. And another thing to bring up again is that even if you kept all of these points, perfectly and all that, that's no guarantee that something adverse isn't going to come into your life. Because things of nature can happen to us all the time, like natural disasters, accidents, or Satan can look for a weak point in our godly armor and use that weak point to cause us some kind of grief. But in general, I would think that these kinds of advice can help us to cope with adverse circumstances by building a kind of resiliency into our being. And trying to follow these pieces of advice can help not have to learn all of those lessons through the difficult school of hard knocks. And so if for that reason alone, I would commend these pieces of advice to your reading. And so, I think these pieces of advice are worthy. I think they're worth considering and worth taking on where perhaps people perceive they have a particular weakness. And so I hope there's something here for everyone. And certainly we would love to hear from people any comments you have about these pieces of advice or pieces of advice you've come across in your life that have been particularly helpful to you. We would certainly appreciate you sharing that with us and with everyone else. And so I think that about wraps it up for this subject. I think our next episode is going to deal with an interesting subject. It's a high-tech subject. Namely, it's the subject of how AI, artificial intelligence, how AI is being used to ramp up Christian persecution. Until then, be good and be blessed. Thank you for being with us today. Just remember, God is in control, and we know how the story ends.